ruthless bully struck a 78-year-old widow so hard she collapsed onto the cold diner floor. Dozens of people saw it happen, yet not a single soul dared to stand up for her. Fear sealed every mouth. The bully smirked, convinced he ruled this town with intimidation and greed. He believed no one could stop him. But he was wrong. He didn't know the woman he humiliated had an adopted son, a highly trained Navy SEAL, and a loyal German Shepherd K9 who would do anything to protect her, and they were about to walk through that same door. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves your heart, please subscribe for more powerful tales of loyalty, faith, and justice. A gray, coastal morning lingered over Harborview, Maine. The sea wind carrying the faint scent of salt and old stories. Inside, the Sea Breeze Diner, an aging seaside eatery with faded teal booths and chipped chrome, 78-year-old Margaret Hayes stood quietly by the door, adjusting the collar of her pale blue knitted cardigan. Margaret was a petite white American woman, no taller than 5'2", with delicate shoulders and soft silver hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. Her skin bore the gentle map of time, fine wrinkles that curled at the corner of her kind blue eyes. She walked with grace, but beneath that fragile exterior lived a deep well of endurance. Her late husband, Charles, had died 3 years ago, leaving the seaside home they built together as the last piece of him she could hold on to. Yet today, loneliness clung to her like an invisible weight. Margaret chose her usual seat, a window booth facing the ocean where the waves struck the cliffs with quiet urgency. She ordered nothing yet, simply warming her stiff hands around a ceramic coffee mug the waitress had set down. That waitress, Hannah Reed, was a 22-year-old white American woman with chestnut-brown curls tied in a high ponytail. Her hazel eyes were sharp and attentive, the eyes of someone who had learned too early that danger often hid in plain sight. She wore a simple denim apron over a maroon shirt, and though she looked cheerful on the surface, the tension in her posture showed she was always bracing for trouble. In this town, trouble had a name. Trouble barged through the diner entrance just minutes later. Dylan Moore, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s with a bristling salt-and-pepper beard and a gut fueled by too many beers and too little accountability. His face always seemed flushed, not from the cold, but from a constant simmering anger buried somewhere deep and festering. Dylan had once been a hard-working contractor, but after his wife left him years ago, bitterness became his only companion. He now worked for rich men who valued intimidation more than integrity. Dylan spotted Margaret instantly. His small dark eyes narrowed and a sneer stretched across his ruddy face. "Well, ain't this something?" he boomed, loud enough that forks froze halfway to mouths. "Queen of the Cliff decided to grace us with her presence." Margaret looked up slowly. Her heart gave a tiny frightened thump, but her voice stayed calm. "Good morning, Mr. Moore." Dylan swaggered forward, boots thudding like a warning drum. "Still holding that rotten shack of yours hostage?" His voice dripped with mock pity. "Coal Developments is trying to improve this town, and all you're doing is dragging us backward." Margaret blinked, fingers tightening around her mug. She had heard this speech too many times, heard the veiled threats behind the talk of progress. Her home, sitting proudly on the cliffside overlooking Harborview Bay, was a key beachfront land that developers hungered for. But to Margaret, that house was her history, her laughter with Charles, the nights of storm watching, the rocking chair creaking softly as she waited for a sailor's safe return. Selling it would be like burying him twice. "I'm not here to discuss business," she replied, her voice fragile yet unwavering. I'm only having my breakfast." Dylan leaned closer, his breath sour with morning alcohol. "Breakfast? Lady, you should be grateful anyone even lets you in here after you messed with the wrong people." Hannah's jaw clenched. With a discreet motion, she set her phone upright behind the napkin dispenser and pressed record. She knew she shouldn't, but she also knew silence helped bullies grow. Margaret forced herself to stand. "Please move aside." She wanted dignity, just distance from the storm. But storms never let their victims walk away. With a flash of sudden rage, Delilah slapped the coffee cup from her hands. It shattered across the floor, spraying hot liquid that stung Margaret's wrist. Gasps rippled through the diner, but no one stood. Fear held them hostage. Dylan's hand rose again, wide, calloused, heavy with cruelty, and struck the side of her face. The crack of his palm echoed like a whip. Margaret stumbled backward, her heel catching the booth. The world tilted, and she fell hard to the cold tile. For a moment, her vision blurred. Shame burned hotter than pain. She wasn't just hurt, she was humiliated, and utterly alone in a room full of people. Outside, a young man in a gray hoodie with a camera on a tripod, Jason Miller, a 26-year-old white American vlogger with sandy blonde hair and an eager spirit, froze. He had come to film the charm of Harborview. Instead, he captured its rot. With trembling fingers, he zoomed in as horror unfolded behind the glass. Margaret lay motionless, palm pressed to her reddening cheek. Inside her chest, a lifetime of strength whispered, "Don't break, not today." But even steel can crack when no one stands beside it. And Margaret Hayes, widow of Harborview, had never felt more breakable. The bell above the diner door chimed, soft and almost out of place against the heavy silence that weighed on the Seabreeze diner. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Luke Carter, a tall white American man, 38 years old, with a frame built from years of elite military training. He had close-cropped sandy brown hair, a sharp jaw dusted with a day's worth of stubble, and eyes the color of winter steel. Calm, but always calculating. Luke's face carried the subtle scars of conflicts far from home, silent stories of battlefields no one in this town could imagine. Though wearing just a green flannel shirt and worn jeans, he moved with that unmistakable balance and alertness of someone who had stared death in the eye and refused to blink. Beside him trotted Archer, a 6-year-old German shepherd with deep, black and tanned fur, muscular build, and a steady, disciplined gaze. Archer's ears stood alert, his head held high. This was not a household pet, but a trained canine who knew how to read danger in a heartbeat. He walked at Luke's left side, perfectly in step, radiating controlled power. Luke's breath caught the moment he spotted Margaret on the floor. For a split second, he wasn't the composed Navy SEAL. He was the terrified boy she once saved. At age 10, he had been a lost foster child with a bruised soul and too many bad memories. Margaret had been the first person to look at him without fear or disappointment. She gave him a home. She gave him a family. She gave him a chance. And seeing her hurt now ignited a fury sharper than any blade. He strode forward, his boots silent yet commanding. "Mom." His voice was low, gentle only for her. Margaret blinked through the sting in her eyes, trying to rise. "Luke, honey, I'm fine." But even as she spoke, her hands trembled. Archer moved instinctively, stepping between Margaret and Dylan, his posture shifting from calm to protective. His deep chest vibrated with a quiet, deadly growl, a sound trained to warn, not threaten. Dylan froze, The false confidence that once dripped from his voice, drained from his face, replaced by a flicker of fear. Luke didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He simply looked at Dylan, one long, cold stare that stripped every layer of bravado away. "What did you do to her?" Luke asked, each word sharp and steady. Dylan attempted a smirk. "It's just a misunderstanding. The old lady—" Luke stepped closer, too close, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Call her old lady again. See what happens." Across the diner, Sheriff Alan Briggs slowly pushed his chair back. Briggs was a white American man in his early 60s, with thinning gray hair and a belly pressing against his tan uniform. He had a lazy manner, like a man who had once cared about justice, but had long since traded that pride for comfort and the favor of the powerful. His brown eyes darted nervously between Luke and Dylan. He recognized a predator in the room, and it wasn't Dylan anymore. All right, Briggs said, raising his hands lazily, voice trying and failing to sound authoritative. "Let's calm things down." Luke didn't even glance at him. His full attention remained locked on Dylan. "You assaulted her," Luke said. "She's a senior citizen, a widow." His fists curled slowly, not in aggression but restraint. "You're going to be arrested." Briggs cleared his throat. "Now, son, we handle our problems locally. No need to go making a scene. Mrs. Hayes just slipped, right?" His voice carried the smug certainty of someone used to twisting the truth into whatever shape he needed. Jason Miller, still outside, kept the camera rolling, zooming into the unfolding confrontation. His heart pounded. He wasn't just documenting a story anymore. He was capturing justice, demanding to be seen. Hannah remained behind the counter, phone recording. Her eyes glistened with relief. Someone finally stood up. Margaret reached for Luke's arm. "Please," she whispered. She hated violence. She hated being the reason for it. But Luke shook his head gently. "No one lays a hand on you." The words were not a threat. They were a promise, forged years ago when she shielded him from his own nightmares. Luke gave a single command to Archer. "Watch." Archer's muscles tensed, eyes locked on Dylan, refusing to let him move even an inch. Dylan stumbled backward, hands shaking, his earlier arrogance melted away. For the first time in years, someone had made him feel small. Luke carefully helped Margaret stand, checking her cheek where a red mark was spreading like a cruel blossom. He swallowed hard, keeping his anger buried only for her sake. "Mom, we're going home," he said softly. "You're safe." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her toward the exit. Every step was a declaration. This was a battle being taken far away from the control of corrupt men. Just before leaving, Luke paused. He turned back toward Dylan, his voice dark and controlled. "You've made a mistake you can't hide from." Sheriff Briggs stiffened. He understood exactly what kind of man he was facing now. Someone who did not fear him, or any of his friends, and someone who never backed away from a fight when family was involved. Outside, waves crashed relentlessly against the cliffs, echoing the storm that had just begun. Luke Carter wasn't just Margaret's son. He was her shield. And he was done letting others decide how her story would be written. A cold afternoon wind swept through Harbor View, rattling loose shutters and carried in the distant cries of gulls as Luke guided Margaret toward his dark gray SUV. Archer walked close, his pace slow and attentive to Margaret's fragile steps. Though she tried to hide it, her legs trembled, and Luke felt each quiver like a jolt inside his own ribs. He opened the passenger door with gentle care. "Let me see," he whispered, brushing his thumb near the red welt on her cheek. Margaret flinched, not from pain but from the humiliation still burning under her skin. "People were watching," she murmured, her voice thin and cracking in the middle. Luke paused. He knew this wasn't just fear. It was the ache of dignity being torn down in front of strangers. "They'll watch again," he replied quietly, "but next time it'll be justice they see." Archer settled himself in the back seat, amber eyes scanning every movement outside, a silent sentinel. As Luke drove away, phone notifications chimed repeatedly on dashboards and pockets across town. Jason Miller, still adrenaline shaken, was hurrying toward his car, uploading the clip he had filmed. Jason was a 26-year-old white American man with a friendly, boyish look, straight blonde hair under a washed-out beanie, wide green eyes full of ambition. He had always hoped for viral content, but not like this. His hands were trembling as he wrote the title. "Elderly Widow Assaulted. Navy SEAL, Son and K-9 Stand Up to Town Bully." He hesitated only a heartbeat before pressing upload. Within minutes, comments poured in. Shock, anger, disbelief. People demanded names. People demanded accountability. And Harborview's dirty secrets, long whispered behind closed doors, began leaking under the harsh spotlight of the internet. Meanwhile, inside his pickup, parked outside the diner, Dylan Moore struggled to light a cigarette, cursing as the lighter slipped. His hands were shaken too much. His heart hammered not from guilt, he barely recognized that emotion, but from fear. His mask of power had cracked. He fumbled to dial a number he knew by heart. "He's back," Dylan hissed into the phone. "The son. And he's dangerous." On the other end of the line sat Mayor Thomas Blake, a white American man in his early 60s, always dressed in expensive charcoal suits that tried too hard to hide the sagging weight of corruption beneath. He had slick silver hair combed back and a pair of icy blue eyes that never smiled even when his lips did. Once a beloved community leader, the hunger for power had hollowed him out. He massaged the gold class ring on his finger when he was anxious, like now. Municipal success had come too easily, and with it, greed. He spoke into the phone with a low, annoyed tone. "Control yourself. We can't afford public chaos." Dylan's voice cracked into desperation. "You don't understand. He's not a regular vet. He looked at me like he's already buried men and wouldn't mind one more." Blake gritted his teeth. "Go home. Stay quiet." But fear had already made Dylan reckless. "And what about the video? It's online. Everyone's gonna see." Mayor Blake's frustration simmered. He ended the call abruptly and poured himself a measure of whiskey, though it wasn't even noon. Harborview was spiraling out of his grip faster than he could spin his lies. Across town, in a warm, cluttered living room filled with antique books and framed family photos that felt like apologies for the life she hadn't lived, Olivia Blake sat alone watching the news on her tablet. Olivia was a white American woman around 60, elegant in a soft beige cardigan and pearl earrings that she wore even when she cried. Her once bright hazel eyes now seemed permanently rimmed with worry. Her marriage had gifted her comfort but stolen her peace. Watching the video, she clutched her rosary, her fingers trembling. Her voice cracked in a whisper no one heard. "What have we become?" She knew Margaret Hayes only by reputation and charity auctions, but seeing another woman her age brutalized for resisting the machine her husband fueled It tore apart the last excuse she'd clung to. Back at the Hayes cliffside home, Luke checked every camera and sensor he had installed like a soldier fortifying a base before nightfall. Archer sniffed along the doorway, tail straight, ears alert. There was a hint of something disturbing in the air, like trouble lurking just beyond the tree line. Margaret watched Luke from her armchair, fingers gripping the armrest. "You don't have to stay," she said softly. "This was supposed to be your vacation." Luke turned toward her, his face softening just a little. "Where else would I be?" She looked down, the guilt of burdening him weighing on her. But Luke crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands, cold and small inside his. "Mom, you saved me from a world that had already given up on me," he whispered. "Now I'm saving you from a world that thought you were alone." Margaret's eyes welled, but not from sadness this time. Luke stood, expression sharpening again. "They're not going to scare you out of your home." He checked the front window again, jaw tightening. "They have no idea who they're up against." Archer returned to Luke's side, sitting tall, ready. Outside, a dark sedan idled near the edge of the woods, watching, waiting. Harborview's powerful had declared war, but Margaret Hayes now had a soldier and a guardian at her doorstep, and the truth, once released, never returned to silence. Night draped Harborview in a curtain of mist, the church bell of St. Mary's Chapel chiming quietly as if afraid to disturb the dark. The chapel, old and built of pale stone imported long ago from Europe, stood alone among a grove of salt-bent pines. Its stained glass windows flickered faintly with the glow of candlelight, offering sanctuary to souls who could no longer bear their burdens alone. Margaret Hayes, wrapped in her soft blue cardigan, stepped carefully up the worn steps. Her cheek still ached from the slap, a dull reminder of cruelty she did not deserve. But what kept her awake tonight was not the pain. It was the message she had received, a request to meet Olivia Blake. Margaret's heart fluttered with both hope and dread. Her life had been simple: love, loss, and quiet endurance. Suddenly, she found herself in a war she never asked for. Inside, the chapel air smelled of aging hymn books and melted wax. Wooden pews, polished smooth by generations of prayer, lined both sides. Margaret spotted Olivia in the front pew. The woman looked smaller, without the armor of political glamour. Olivia Blake was a white American woman in her early 60s, refined but weary, her elegant posture softened by guilt. Her hazel eyes, usually framed by perfect makeup, were bare tonight, red from holding back tears. She wore a gray wool coat that hung loose, as though the weight of conscience had hollowed her from the inside. Margaret approached slowly. Olivia didn't stand. She only whispered, "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming." "Please, call me Margaret," she answered gently, lowering herself into the pew beside Olivia. Olivia's fingers trembled against the clasp of her handbag. She inhaled, shaky, as though the truth inside her could burn her from within. "My husband, Thomas, he told you selling would help the town." Her voice cracked. "But it wasn't about helping anyone except himself. And Richard Cole." At the name, Margaret felt a spike of cold fear. Richard Cole, the businessman who had been buying up every inch of coastline he could touch, was the center of everything wrong happening in Harborview. He was a white American man in his late 40s with a sharply cut jawline, slicked back dark hair, and suits tailored so perfectly that he seemed to wear arrogance like couture. He cared about power more than people, about numbers more than names. Luke had once called men like him the most dangerous breed, smiling wolves. Olivia's guilt spilled faster now. Thomas wasn't always this way. Years ago, he truly cared about Harborview, but when Cole developed his first resort up north and the money poured in, Thomas changed. Cole fed that greed, and when someone resisted, her voice faltered. They sent Dylan. Margaret closed her eyes a moment, fighting a tremor. Olivia reached into her handbag and pulled out a small black USB drive. Her hand hovered uncertainly before offering it to Margaret. Everything is on this. Audio recordings, bank transfers, property harassment orders, every rotten decision they've made. I copied it from my husband's personal safe. She swallowed hard. If Thomas discovers what I've done, I don't know what he'd do, or what Cole would do. They think fear is a language everyone understands. Margaret stared at the tiny object. It felt like holding a key that could unlock both salvation and destruction. "Why give it to me?" she asked softly. Olivia's voice dropped to a trembling whisper. "Because you're the only one not afraid of them. And because your son—" She paused, emotion tightening her throat. "Your son isn't someone they can scare." Margaret thought of Luke, kneeling beside her, vowing she was no longer alone. Tears welled in her tired eyes. "He believes in protecting what's right." "And I believe," Olivia replied with a trembling breath, "that God puts the right people where they're needed most." A gust of wind rattled the chapel door. Olivia flinched, nerves frayed to the edge. She stood quickly, clutching Margaret's hand. "Please take it, and please, stay safe." Margaret squeezed Olivia's hand in return, a gesture of solidarity between two women pushed to the brink by men who underestimated them. As Margaret stepped outside into the cold night air, Luke emerged from the shadows near the pine trees. His broad silhouette was tense, jaw clenched as if ready to break the night open if she hadn't come out alone. Archer padded beside him, ears erect, breath puffing small clouds of vigilance. But Margaret managed a small, hopeful smile. "We have what we need," she whispered, holding up the USB drive. Luke took it carefully, eyes narrowing with fierce resolve. Margaret watched him analyze the weight of the moment, understanding instantly what must come next. Harborview had thrown its first punch. Now it was time for Margaret Hayes, and the son she saved, to strike back. The first rays of dawn slid over the cliffs of Harborview, painting the ocean in shimmering gold and announcing a day that would forever change the town. Inside Margaret Hayes's cozy living room, Luke Carter sat with the black USB drive beside his laptop, its screen glowing with federal encryption software. Archer lay nearby, his powerful body stretched on the rug, but his ears still alert to every sound. Margaret watched from her armchair, hands folded tightly, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and hope. Luke finished extracting the files and immediately contacted a trusted federal liaison, Special Agent Daniel Ross, an NCIS field operative in his early 40s. Ross was a white American man with a clean-shaven jawline, dark hair peppered at the temples, and a deep voice shaped by years of managing crises. He was calm, methodical, and known to be incorruptible. He arrived that morning wearing a navy suit and bulletproof vest discreetly beneath it. His eyes held sharp intelligence and a flicker of respect when Margaret greeted him. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, shaking her hand firmly but kindly, "your courage just handed us the perfect case." Luke joined the agent outside to coordinate with reinforcements. Before long, black SUVs rolled into Harborview, quiet, efficient, and unstoppable. FBI agents and NCIS officers fanned out across the town like a wave of justice. They worked under Special Agent Rebecca Ward, a capable white American woman in her late 30s with strawberry blonde hair pulled into a neat bun and green eyes that missed nothing. She exuded confidence and fairness, someone who had seen corruption before and knew exactly how to break its spine. First, they headed to Mayor Thomas Blake's office. The mayor, still wearing his expensive suit and morning cologne, was mid-denial when the warrant was read to him. The facade of charm vanished. Fear, raw and unmasked, took its place. Handcuffed in front of his staff, he looked right past the agents to the door, hoping for a wife who would save him. But Olivia wasn't there. Olivia Blake stood at home, watching agents seize documents from their study, tears streaming but breath finally free. Next came the arrest of Richard Cole. He was found in his mansion, glass, marble, and ego, trying to delete files off his tablet. His slick confidence evaporated when he realized the server had already been copied by federal forensics. As agents led him outside, he shouted threats about lawyers and money. But no one listened. The only sound that mattered now was justice closing in. Dylan Moore was arrested last. He tried to talk his way out, tried to joke, tried to lie. But when confronted with the video, with himself hurting a grandmother, even he couldn't hide behind false bravado. The cuffs clicked around his wrists and his shoulders collapsed. His own choices had brought him here. At the Seabreeze Diner, news spread fast. Patrons paused mid-bite as headlines lit up every phone in the room. Hannah Reed sat behind the counter, stunned and shaken with relief. A corporate representative from the diner's chain, Mr. Greg Turner, a white American man around 50 with a neat beard, a tailored blazer, and a firm but fair personality, walked in unannounced. He announced that Hannah was not only rehired, but promoted. "We need more people with integrity like you." Hannah's blush carried both pride and disbelief. By afternoon, Harborview felt different, lighter, as if someone had finally opened a window in a long-sealed room. Reporters swarmed, praising the bravery of a widow and the son she raised not by blood, but by love. Margaret insisted on staying inside, overwhelmed by the attention. Luke stood beside her at the window, watching Archer playfully nudge a curious neighborhood child. For a moment, just a moment, Luke allowed himself to breathe. Later, Mayor Blake's wife visited the Hayes home. Olivia arrived with red but peaceful eyes. She apologized, not just for what happened, but for the years she stayed silent. Margaret took her hands and said softly, "Sometimes God gives us one moment to act. You made yours count." Olivia smiled through tears. As evening fell across the cliff, Margaret and Luke sat together on the porch swing. Archer rested at Margaret's feet, head over her shoes, loyal to the heartbeat he guarded. The sea breeze smelled like good change. "You saved me," Margaret whispered. "No," Luke replied, his voice warm like sunlight through clouds. "You saved me first." And for the first time in a long while, Margaret Hayes felt safe. Not because danger disappeared, because love stood in front of it. Her home would remain hers. Her spirit remained unbroken. Harborview would heal. And beside her, a son and a watchful German shepherd proved that light always finds its way home. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder and lightning. They come quietly, through the courage of a kind heart, the loyalty of a protector, and the love that God places between us. In every ordinary day, there is a chance to stand up for what is right and to be someone's answered prayer. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to help us spread hope and faith. May God bless you and your loved ones with protection, strength, and peace in every step you take. And remember, light always wins.